Good afternoon, everyone. Warm welcome. My name's Louise Sims. I'm the professional officer, one of the professional officers at BASW England. Thank you so much for joining us, and welcome to this third session of the 80/20 conference, which is part of BASW England's celebration of World Social Work Month. You'll have probably realised you've been muted as you've come in, and we'll keep the mics off so that we don't get any distortion. That's not to say that we don't want to engage with you. We really do. Please use the chat for questions, comments, observations. There will be time at the end for a panel discussion, and yeah, we'd really encourage you to take part in that. Okay, so this session is about organisational culture. Relationship-based practice cannot take place in a vacuum, and we know that good practice requires a supportive organisation. So practitioners at all levels of the system need to have the opportunity to engage in reflective and curious spaces which strengthen relationships and promote critical thinking, hopeful practice and workforce well-being. So we need organisations that promote learning, that enable us to learn, that facilitate our learning. And this session really is to discuss an initiative which seeks to do that. So this session will look at the work of Quality Circle. Quality Circle is a forum. It's a self-regulating independent group of practitioners that meet regularly and seek to progress a learning culture across the Sussex family justice system. So forum attendees include social workers, solicitors, barristers, legal executives, academics, psychiatrists, CAFCAS, judges and the police. The work of the group is action orientated, and it's also complemented by a parent and young person panel made up of people who've had experience of the family justice system. So some of you joining the webinar today will know Quality Circle. You'll have some knowledge and experience of what we'll be discussing. We want everyone to engage. So please, again, use the chat and we'll be monitoring that. So today's speakers are Maris Stratulis, who's our National Director here at BASW England. Hey, Maris. We have Nicola McGowan, who's the Principal Social Worker for East Sussex County Council. We have Millie Kerr, who's the Antiracist Lead Practitioner at Brighton and Hove. And we have Laura Riddell, who's the Partner in Change Hub Manager from Brighton and Hove. Hi, Laura. So enough from me. I'm going to hand over to Maris to tell us more about what the 80/20 campaign is and the ongoing work of BASW England to promote relationship-based practice. Thank you, Maris.
Brilliant. Thanks, Louise. It's great to be joining the third session of the 80/20 conference. We've heard really powerful messages from people with lived experience, practitioners and researchers today about the importance and the value of relationship-based practice and the fun of using resources and toolkits, including the kit bag. Throughout the session today, there'll be really useful tips and resources that are cited in the chat, so keep an eye on the chat and please engage as much as you can. Today we're joined by amazing women, and I'd like to say Happy International Women's Day, a great day for celebration, and really the importance of sharing diverse life experiences and work journeys, and the importance of influencing organisational cultures. The 80/20 campaign came about as more and more members were telling us they did not have enough time to do work directly with children, families and adults. The campaign developed and highlighted some key messages. Lisa, next slide, please. Social workers need enough time to work with families to achieve good outcomes and families staying together. That social workers were frustrated that they were spending too much time on administration and tasks and bureaucracy. The real importance of therapeutic, reflective, relationship-based practice, is the best way for social workers to bring effective and positive change to children and families. The 80-20 campaign is our opportunity collectively to create effective change by putting relationships in practice at the heart of what we do and to influence organisations. We appreciate it's really tough when you have competing priorities and you may not be in an organisation that supports you influencing and having direct time with the people that you work with. We believe you can shape and influence that agenda, and we will support you in any way we can. In terms of the context, a national 80-20 reference group was established. We've got a really active steering group that consists of members, experts by experience, partners and colleagues. A key partner has been the University of Sussex, and we've hosted a variety of conferences and developed resources, again, that will be signposted in the chat, to support relationship-based social work and to promote dynamic, creative organisations that support their workforce. And we'll certainly be hearing about that later from other speakers. In response to the asks from social work and social workers, we have developed theory to practice sessions and created the space and time for social workers and experts to come together and to make a difference. All good social work is dependent on relationships. The pandemic, more than ever, has highlighted significant stark inequalities and challenges for individuals, families, communities and organisations. And the use of digital technology has become an ever-increasing new way of working. Yes, there are strengths with that technology, but there are also lots of challenges, and issues of isolation, disconnection, and not building relationships in person has been a key issue. Evidence has shown that relationship-based social work is under serious threat from burdensome systems and increasing demand, coupled with limiting resources ever more so. A watershed moment should have been provided following the Eileen Munro review of child protection, which highlighted bureaucracy, processes, computer systems that were outdated, created too many obstacles to good practice. The Children's Commissioner's Office has also highlighted through the Stability Index reports children saying they do not see or hear enough from their social workers. The key messages from our survey in 2018 highlighted that on average social workers were spending 29 hours per week on their computer, 12 hours per week involved in direct contact. Responders shared that they were spending less time in terms of reflective practice. 32% said they spent no time on reflective practice, 42% less than an hour. This has to change, and we need to create the culture, the environment, the conducive organisational support that enables this to happen. Ultimately, the 80-20 campaign is an attempt to eventually reverse the current situation, which sees social workers spending close to 80% of their time doing admin. Building relationships has got to be key. We've recently relaunched a 80-20 follow-up survey, and the initial headlines from that survey are concerning. Already we're receiving messages from social workers saying generally there is a lot more paperwork now than ever before. There is still no time for direct work, far less face-to-face meetings with people and with families, unless there is a specific reason. You are the shapers of this change, and we strongly encourage you to complete the survey linked to the 80-20 survey that we've currently put out on email and through the networks that we have. Practitioners at all levels of the system need to have the opportunity to engage in reflective spaces which strengthen relationships and promotes critical thinking. The theme for World Social Work Day is about co-building a new social work world, leaving no one behind. Social workers are from an international community, and human connections and relationships are fundamental to our values and ethics. Please join the 80-20 campaign and make a pledge. Next slide, please, Lisa. To finish off, just some of the reflections about the importance of our campaign and the fundamental ethics and values that this is built on. Anti-racism, equality, diversity and inclusion. The importance of mutual respect and honesty. Effective communication in all forms, but ideally in terms of in-person contact. Information sharing, support and participation. We've heard today some really moving accounts of how social workers have made a difference. The social workers that have supported young people to go to the Open University first day, the social workers that have supported connections with siblings, the social workers that listened and were there in difficult times. You do make a difference every single day. Let's make sure that we can support and encourage organisations to collectively make that difference. We will now be hearing from Nicola McGowan, Principal Social Worker from East Sussex, about Quality Circle. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Got a little bit of feedback. Is everybody on mute? Great, I'll press ahead. Hi, my name's Nicola McGowan. It's actually quite hard to say. Everybody says McGowan, but it's actually Nicola McGowan. And I'm the Principal Social Worker from East Sussex Children's Services. And I'm really delighted to be here with my fellow women colleagues, Millie and Laura, on International Women's Day. So a call out to all you fantastic women that are in the audience and our colleagues as well. But I'm really delighted today to talk about Quality Circle. And I really love the fact that it's part of an event about relationships. I've talked at different events about Quality Circle, but not in the context of relationships. And actually, Quality Circle is all about relationships. Relationships created Quality Circle in the first place. Relationships got the ball rolling from a small group of 20 or so to over 900 today. We have relationships with whom the families we work, which allows us to involve parents in the most impactful way. And relationships is what actually helps us to create change in a system that is traditionally inert and closed. You'll be pleased to know that in the spirit of Quality Circle, maybe not pleased to know, I will not be using PowerPoint. In Quality Circle, believe it or not, PowerPoints are actually banned because we find that actually we did use PowerPoints at the beginning, but actually what we found is that it creates barriers for discussion. And for example, Beth Neal talked at our event just recently about post-adoption contact. And she said afterwards she thought it was completely brilliant. About it's the first time that she'd been in such an event without PowerPoints, and she found it really, really engaging. So, I mean, Louise has already given you a bit of information about what Quality Circle is, but I'll just sort of give you a bit more. Quality Circle was originally set up by Martin Downes, who is a human rights barrister and counsel in London and Brighton Chambers, and he is, for everybody that knows him, a power to behold. He wanted to set up a group who worked in the court setting to talk about research and how it relates to strengthening good practice in the court system. And through a long-standing relationship with me as a social worker and a practice manager, actually my time in Brighton, where he represented on many of my cases for the local authority, he then approached me in my position many, many years later as a principal social worker in East Sussex to help him to lead on this initiative. And it was because I had enormous respect and warmth toward that felt towards Martin that I did say, instead of what I should have said, that I'm too busy and go away, I said, no, that's a really good idea, let's do it. And largely due to Martin's energy, we have built upon that that relationship and the relationship with others, and that's been a key success of Quality Circle. Both Martin and I had worked in Sussex for many years and know a lot of people. This allowed us to keep the key movers and to map out the key movers and shakers across the system, who we knew were going to be really engaged in wanting to improve things for practitioners, for children, for families, and who felt that they might want to be part of creating change. And so this has resulted in the involvement of people, our colleagues in Brighton. I've got to do a call out to Francis King in Brighton and Hove, Kelly Steele in West Sussex, Tom Stibbs, who's a peer of mine in Brighton. Of course, BASW's very own Louise Sims, who's a massive advocate for us in terms of Quality Circle. Professor Michelle Lefay, who spoke earlier today, and she's really critical. Professor Beth Neal, Professor Brid Featherstone, and Christy Hinkle, and Beverly Barnett-Jones, and Mary Ryan from Nuffield. They're all really strong advocates for us, but not as strong an advocate as those that are located locally. And two of those are going to be talking today. They are brightest stars in terms of Quality Circle, which is Laura and Millie. And yeah, Louise, you're right. They won't like me saying that, but that's absolutely true. And so Laura Riddell is Partners for Change manager in Brighton, and Millie is the anti-racist lead practitioner. And they have actually created our most impactful piece of work, which is around the anti-racist practice statement for courts. So the circle has gradually expanded, as I said, starting from a small group of lawyers and social workers, and now includes CAFCAS, magistrates. Critically, it includes the judiciary, magistrates and judges, because that is where we are, I think, different from other kind of collectives in the fact that they're actually really powerful and normally quite a closed group of people, and we're really making success by actually having such a strong presence from them, and for them to be so engaged in what we're trying to achieve through the Quality Circle. We're really, really lucky in that regard. So the group first met in November 2017 and has met every other month pretty much since then. And we've covered topics such as trauma-informed practice, the voice of the child, and domestic abuse. And meetings take place every other month, as I said, and we know that people are really, really busy. And because these meetings tend to happen after hours, we're really strict. We keep it to 75 minutes. And in normal times, pre-COVID, when we were actually meeting face to face, we would rotate it across the area, which is our Family Justice board area, which is West Sussex, Brighton and Hove, and East Sussex, and each local authority would take turns in holding the event, and we would sit in a circle to promote discussion. However, obviously with COVID, we've had to move our meetings online. So Quality Circle is a good example of how collaborative working founded on good relationships creates change. However, another key concept that Louise referred to there is that our activity has to be action focused. And with that in mind, following each session, we make a number of recommendations, which I'll talk about in a moment, which then I sit on the Family Justice Board and take our action plan. And I'm going to do that this evening after today's meeting. Actually, I'm going to the Family Justice Board to take forward our updated action plan, which then the board are in a position to then implement those recommendations across the region. So it's not just a talking shop. Quality Circle's collaboration has also generated a Quality Circle parent and young people panel, which I help facilitate. And the people on that panel are made up of parents who've been part of care proceedings and private proceedings, and young people from the Family Justice Young People Board, which is supported by CAFCAS. They have a say in our agenda setting, but most critically, they make the recommendations, many recommendations which are taken to the board. And interestingly, when I do present the general recommendations that maybe we as a steering group and others have made, and then those recommendations that are made by the Parent and Young People panel, the Family Justice Board really listen to the recommendations from the family and from the Parent and Young People panel, and they're the ones that they get really excited about. So as we've been developing, the theme that we return to over and over again is improving the experience of children and families in the courts and strengthening their voice. With this in mind, we've had a father who has gone through our FDAC system, and he talked very movingly about what it was about this system that meant his children were returned and thrived in his care, and what we could apply in the normal court system. And partly as a result of his involvement, he now works for us in East Sussex as a parent mentor, which is just fantastic. We've had 2 special guardians and a young person talk at an event, which resulted in much more consistency across the 3 local authorities in terms of timeliness of sharing the right info. And very powerfully, we have had a Black father speak about his experiences, including that of discrimination within the court system. And this is what Laura and Millie will be speaking to in a moment. Most recently, we had a mother from East Sussex speak very powerfully about her experience of having 8 of her children removed from her care, and what it was that meant she kept her youngest. She powerfully talked about the experience of professionals talking over her and dismissing her in the court environment, and the experience of having her children removed at birth and having little support following that. This has really galvanised a local response from us in terms of how we hold conversations and the experience of parents in the court. And also we are doing a joint up response in terms of the learning from Nuffield research about born into care, which is being shared right across the 3 local authorities. And there's a joint webinar across the 3 local authorities in a couple of weeks' time, which will assist in the implementation of new practice guidance. In order to involve parents in this way, you have to develop a really trusting, supportive relationship so that they feel empowered to speak in front of magistrates and judges. I still feel semi-terrified talking in front of magistrates and judges, and I've been doing it for years. So I'm always in awe of the family of our parents that are able to do this. This key work has been undertaken by different social work members of the Quality Circle and is a really important part of making this work. As a result of this, parents feel able to speak from the heart, and it's this directness that provides the biggest motivator for change for the judiciary and others, and you will see that when Laura and Millie talk about that in a moment. The involvement of parents and carers in this way has put hefty weight behind some of the actions we have taken forward. A central development has been the implementation of the Culture of Respect document, which has been inspired by an article by Survive and Safeguarding, and the feedback from our children in care about how alienating the court system can be. The outcome was a manifesto which was approved and adopted by the Sussex Family Justice Board and published by the Nuffield Family Justice Observatory, with whom we work closely. This Culture of Respect document lays out our guiding principles of respect, equality and inclusion, including the use of straightforward language, which all those who work in the court sign up to. As we have progressed, we are constantly updating this manifesto, for example, ensuring it is trauma-informed. As the Quality Circle has been developing, we've all been strengthening our relationships with each other. I have a much better understanding and reciprocal relationship with my peers in the 3 local authorities, and a good understanding of where the expertise lays. This has resulted in the 3 local authorities joining through the Quality Circles to develop an annual programme of training for our magistrates, which we share across our sector. We are delivering training on child sexual abuse, anti-racist practice in courts, which Laura and Millie have been leading on, permanence, domestic abuse and trauma. And at each meeting, we normally have a leading light in a particular subject area. And this is often an academic who is able to share their research and work with us to apply this into practice. As I've mentioned, Michelle Lafay has been with us from the start, providing enormous support, guidance and research, and been an active contributor herself, both on criminal exploitation and supporting the voice of the child. This involvement of academia serves to provide an evidence base and rigour to what we're trying to achieve through Quality Circle. As the circle evolves, our tentacles reach out, mostly via those who know others, and this has resulted in, and that's key to relationships and that cascading effect. This has resulted in over 900 people being on our mailing list, and we regularly have 150 to 200 people at our events. This kind of momentum puts us in a unique position, being a body of professionals who have actually been created outside of the system, but by virtue of working, actually most of us do work within the court system, we can inform the court system from inside and from outside. As our work extends, we are now seeking to encompass and respond to issues of well-being, which nearly all our sessions to date have led up to. Well-being relates to the impact of trauma, impact of racism, which in itself is traumatic, the impact of alienation in the court system. Well-being relates to children and families and critically professionals in the system. Again, taking a wild stab in the dark, I would say that we're going to be needing to look at once we get to the stage of action around well-being, it will be about relationships. Anyway, I could literally talk for hours about Quartet Circle and people will absolutely start glazing over. But I think the most effective way for you to really understand what our work is about is to hear about the area in which we have created the most impact. And that is the creation of the Anti-Racist Practice Statement for Courts, which has been crafted and developed by Millie Kerr and Laura Riddell. And without their passion and creativity and absolute pure hard work, when they're so enormously busy, this would have never, ever have got off the ground. And it's such a vital first step in fighting racism in courts and beyond. And so I'd like to hand over to Laura and Millie.
Thanks, Nicola. And I'd just like to say that it's a whole constellation of stars, I think, in the Quality Circle. And I think when you're flagging a bit, you can't help but be kind of caught up in the passion and the commitment and the enthusiasm from Nicola and from Martin and others. It's a great example kind of our relationships spurring each other on to creative practice. And I think it's been really great to have this kind of a forum in Sussex where the relationships and links between professions have been developed and strengthened, and the tone really set for respectful working together and for our work with families, so that we could bring such a challenging session to the Quality Circle, and then for it to land on open ears and minds and hearts. So in Brighton and Hove, we've been working really hard on our anti-racist strategy and our practice. And I'm going to hand over to Millie in a moment to talk some more about this. I manage the partners in Changehub, which is a multidisciplinary service supporting our model of relationship-based social work practice. It's the natural home for Millie's role, and it means we have a focus on anti-racist practice that permeates through our work with families, through our reflective spaces and our training. My role in the Quality Circle steering group meant that I was able to use that relationship to extend the reach of Millie's work out into the local family justice system. And I'm going to pass over to Millie at this point to talk about her role with Daddy and how it was we came to invite him to speak at a Quality Circle event. Millie.
Hi, thank you very much, Laura. And I suppose before we got to the point of asking Daddy to come to the Quality Circle, I thought I'd just touch briefly on my role really as anti-racist lead for Brighton and Hove City Council, which is a role that is very much about getting social workers to have, well, everyone in children's services, I would argue, to have uncomfortable conversations about race, where we can actually begin to think about everyone's biases, stereotypes and prejudices, and the impact of intersectional racism, I suppose, within safe spaces. And within that role, I hold weekly anti-racist discussion groups. I undertake training, as well as undertake the big part of my role, which is undertaking consultations and case formulations. And it was a particular case formulation involving a Black father, Dad E, in this instance, with a social worker that generated the work and the interviews that we conducted within the Family Court Quality Circle. But initially, I had a consultation with a social worker result in issues relating to Dad E. And I would also say that a big part of undertaking this work is very much getting social workers to think about their fears and grow and assist them in terms of growing in confidence, particularly where there may be fears that they may be called racist or fears around getting it wrong, as well as very much thinking about looking through not just what we have as Eurocentric perspectives, but also getting social workers and others to very much think about how we work with different cultures, different parenting styles, different traditions, customs and norms that may be different from our own. And in doing that, the case on relation with Dad E looked at a number of issues that the social worker and the network around the social worker wanted support with. Some of the other networks that were involved in some of the case formulation meetings, which also highlights, I suppose, multi-agency working, were meetings that also involved the social worker, foster carers, education leads, and there was a therapist also involved in this case, as well as including Dad E in some of these conversations, if not all. And in terms of this particular case, which was some of the reason why it came to Quality Circle, because it had a number of intersectional elements really and complexities that I think everyone needed to think about, which was the main reason I was asked to get involved. And some of those complexities, which are not all necessarily complexities when I look at them, but I can see how they're complexities for many, and particularly when social workers are not used to working with diversity, because I suppose the other element of some of this, Brighton and Hove City Council is a very white, has a very white demographic, and not as diverse staff members yet as we would like, but we are growing in diversity. But I suppose in terms of some of the complexity that led to this work was that Dad E is a Black African male. English was his second language. He was subject to immigration control, but not as an asylum seeker. And he also had extended family members across borders, which we needed to think about, because they may also be part of the growing family later on in terms of joining him in the UK. And it was very much looking at how we worked with the social worker and other multi-agency partners to get them to think about some of the cultural norms and parenting styles and differences that they needed to work with in this case. And some of the challenges, I suppose, that came from this in terms of working with Dad E was some of the stereotypes, assumptions and prejudices, I suppose, that were around this case in terms of working with this Black father. And some of those issues related to the fact that he had different parenting styles. Dad parent differently in this part of Africa where Dad came from. They don't necessarily have the primary role to care for their children. He was described as loud, question mark, potentially aggressive, because of the way he spoke, and he highlighted, you know, that Black African men, and he personally speaks loud. Because he speaks loud, it doesn't necessarily mean that he's being aggressive. And we had conversations around that, as well as his daughter having to learn about some of that and how dads are different from mums, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. And as well as thinking about the different parenting styles and how Dad was perceived in terms of how he potentially spoke loudly, there were also issues and concerns around possible physical chastisement, because physical chastisement was a feature of Dad's parenting, but it was not necessarily going to be a feature of how he was going to parent his child here in the UK. But all of these things came into play in terms of also what were some of the things that he may have been used to in parenting, his parenting, and also how that could potentially impact him parenting his child. Now, I suppose in the mix of this, and what I haven't said yet, is that his child, he'd been separated from the child's mother for a very long time, since his child was born, I would say. His daughter was in the care of the local authority on a full care order because she could not remain in the care of her mother. And after the separation from dad. Dad went back to his home country for a little while and then came back a few years ago, particularly to work, and he's now working here. And with all of the issues going on, he felt that he wanted care of his daughter. His daughter was in foster care. There were issues going on right now. Case was in proceedings, and the social worker wanted support as well to make sure that she thought about all the cultural issues and the impact of all of these issues really on her assessment, wanting to think about them, should I say, so that she didn't let any of her biases, prejudices or stereotypes impact her decision making. So I'll also add at this point is his daughter is of dual heritage. Mum is white British, dad is Black African. There were additional issues because of past trauma that had impacted on his daughter, where she had a fear in the mix of this, you could argue, of possible black men because of how what she had observed, I suppose, within the family home previously, as well as additional trauma she had experienced in the previous family home before she came into foster care. And there were issues that we were also needing to think about and discuss around her identity, because at this particular time she was identifying as white, and it was how we could also think about, even if she wanted to identify as mixed heritage at a later date, there were some negative perspectives of Black men. It was how we worked with her identity so that she also thought about her other side of her cultural identity in terms of her African cultural side of her identity. So my role was very much to support the social worker in thinking about all of these issues. And in thinking about all of these issues, with the case being in proceedings and viability assessments going on for dad to potentially care for his daughter so that she would leave foster care, we thought it'd be a really good case to come to the Quality Circle, because there's a lot of complexities there, as I've touched on, immigration control, working across borders, extended family members, English being a second language, as well as potential stereotypes, assumptions of dad's background, where he came from. In addition, the further challenges I would argue that dad also faced in terms of understanding our processes, the systems we work with, as well as the judiciary and the court process and proceedings.
And I think Millie, some of the work that's, am I causing an echo? I can hear an echo. I'm sorry. I'll keep going.
Sound good. Sound good.
Some of the work you were doing that you've just described around identity and getting the network to think differently about Daddy was kind of challenging some of our traditional British court-based thinking about permanence and cracking on and sorting things out in a good time frame. So it's kind of rubbing up, wasn't it? And that was another reason I think it was so helpful to bring it to Quality Circle for us to think about together.
Absolutely, absolutely, because I suppose in the mix of that, some of the biases and some of the challenges could have generated a different outcome from the one we actually got, which was fantastic,
and
which
it
was
took
greatly assisted
patient, patient social work within good relationships to get there, I think, Millie.
Absolutely, and I think that's the other thing I'm going to touch on, Laura, which I think you're very aware of, and I think everyone else has kind of touched on in this space already in terms of time. You know, I've now been supporting this family and social worker for what's been a year now, and I think if I hadn't been supporting this family in this way and the social worker, there may have potentially been a different outcome. But I suppose what the major benefits of working with this case brought, and there were challenges, but what it also brought was also some understanding, I would argue, and better multi-agency working and understanding from people like the schools, I would argue as well, because I would argue there were potentially some stereotypical and prejudicial viewpoints from schools and education system in that, which is now really, I can see the difference in terms of their thinking about how they perceived a black dad talking loud, possible worries about physical chastisement. I could see the change in that thinking in terms of getting them to think about some of the stereotypes that they may have in their head and unconscious bias. So I could see the positives there. But in terms of the quality circle and bringing it to the quality circle, I spoke to the social worker and then Dad, and everybody agreed it would be a great case to bring. And what was really, really great about it in the midst of it all was Dad agreeing to participate in the discussion, because, you know, I could argue it'd been quite scary for him coming to a really big meeting with like over 200 barristers, lawyers, judges, social workers, academics, all in the mix. But he was very
scary for us, wasn't it, Millie?
He was very up for the challenge, because from his perspective, there were a number of things he was unhappy about. But the way we spoke about it and we prepared for it, you know, he was so up for it. He did a 5-6 page presentation, which we had to sort of trim down a little bit to make it more of me interviewing him, rather than him giving a presentation to the group. But it was good. He agreed to participate, and he agreed to participate for a number of reasons, really. He wanted to talk about things that had gone well within working with the systems, and that is children's social care, as well as the court system and proceedings. And then he wanted to impart with everybody, really learning from his perspective, really, about what would have helped going forward. So that in itself was quite powerful in terms of getting him to agree to do that and wanting everyone to learn from his experiences, you know. And I suppose once we got to the quality circle, you know, it also highlighted, and he also very much talked about how he hadn't always felt listened to or heard, how he spoke about he didn't always understand fully what was going on in terms of social work assessments, in terms of court systems, processes and decision making. And I think some of the other things that he touched on, really, although he spoke really good English, he didn't always understand, once we got into the court arena, all the language, the processes, the systems that were used within that space. So he would have benefited from having an interpreter to explain some of the more complex stuff that was going on within the court arena, because not being from this country originally, I think, as Nicola rightly touched on, the court processes is scary for all of us. But if it's also a system that you're not familiar with, and particularly our way of doing things in this country, it's doubly hard, even if your English is good. So, you know, there was learning there for all around, thinking about language in particular. And that's just not language in terms of the language that he spoke, the second language, with English being his second language. It was about the language we use within our systems and teams in terms of children's social care, jargon and acronyms, and in terms of the judiciary, jargon, acronyms, the labels we also have and use within our work, and all of that in the mix, really, in terms of language, not just the spoken. It's also about how we record and how we assess, and how people interpret what we record and write within our assessments, which could also potentially be biased and discriminatory, which we also need to be mindful of.
I think some of those points that Daddy made around language have formed a kind of a core part of our statement for anti-racist practice. It's kind of like a direct distillation of the learning that he shared with us in the Quality Circle into that statement.
Absolutely, very, very key part, really. And that's some of the things I also get social workers to think a lot about in the whole process when we're thinking about anti-racist practice, and then it feeding into the court process. So as well as language, he also talked about, I suppose, the support he could have received. He spoke a lot about, I suppose, his feelings about foster care, the impact, I suppose, on him trying to build relationships with his daughter, lots of things really impacting on our element of the work as children's social care, as well as what could have been done better in terms of the court. So in terms of that, you know, I think what also came out of it, which was really powerful, there were barristers, lawyers, and a judge in particular who felt that we needed to do better. And the reason he felt we needed to do better, Dad relayed that one of the big issues that he found was around communication. Communication in terms of support from his lawyers in particular, and only being given at times 1 hour or 20 minutes, he also highlighted at one point, to be ready for a hearing. All of this was further compounded, I would argue, by the fact that many hearings over the past year, 2 years, have been done virtually. So you can understand how much more of a challenge it is if you're asking someone to read a report you may only have received an hour ago, or your lawyer is asking you to, or going over it with you 20 minutes before you're due in a virtual hearing. You can see how challenging that would be. Yes, English was good, but in the mix of all of that and the language we use in our report writing and our assessments, oh my gosh, I think if I was somebody due to be in court in 20 minutes or an hour, I would find that challenging. Never mind the fact that English would be his second language. So this was picked up by one of the judges in particular as learning, I suppose, for the judiciary and lawyers in particular, in terms of thinking about how we make more time. Time, I think, is a big key in all of this, really, in terms of really trying to find and make time, and particularly when you are working with families from Black, Asian and minoritized backgrounds. Really important. And that's been the whole theme, I would say, in terms of all the anti-racist work I've been doing across services, but particularly within children's services, how we actually take time to learn about different cultures and parenting styles and how people do things differently.
It's just vital, isn't it, that you know, you change the system to fit around and serve the people it needs to serve, rather than try and squash people into our system and our timescales.
Absolutely, and I think that's one of the key things. I've touched on it earlier in my conversation, that our systems are very white Eurocentric. It's very much thinking and getting social workers and the system and others, multi-agency partners, to think through a different lens sometimes. Yes, it's hard because our models, social work is Eurocentric. Everything about our culture is quite Eurocentric, but it's how we bring in those other perspectives. And really, I suppose the big element of it really across children's social care and the judiciary in terms of thinking about cases in proceedings is very much thinking about looking through that different lens, but not just through that different lens. I was going to say something else there, but it's gone out of my mind. But anyway, not just through the different lens, but just really, oh, that was it. Not just looking through the different lens, but looking through a strengths-based model, because we can sometimes look at working with children and families from Black, Asian and minoritized backgrounds through a deficit model. You know, even if I highlight some of the intersectional elements we were talking about earlier around immigration control, English as a second language, Black dad, and the stereotypes around Black men, you can see some of the intersectional challenges that we sometimes have to face. But outside of the big thing that the judge picked up, one of the judges picked up in particular, but many of the other barristers and lawyers agreed around time and making time to talk to families, and particularly Black dads and families, around what's going on. It was also very much thinking about how we do things as well. And it's been very difficult with COVID outside of using virtual forums and Zoom. How we actually respect people's different cultural differences, their different backgrounds, their different languages, and the different religions that they may also come from. And I suppose a lot of the learning from this resulted in us developing what was our family court anti-racist practice statement. And this was born out of, I suppose, a lot of the conversation that came from the Quality Circle discussions with the barristers, lawyers, judges, academics, social workers, others that were present in that space, in that everyone felt, and I suppose Laura could probably add to it, were quite shocked and surprised about some of the things that they were hearing, and really were all feeling that we needed to do better.
It was a real catalyst, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I remember kind of facilitating the discussion, but actually holding my breath a little bit, because Daddy was so powerful.
Yeah.
And he went off script a little bit. Millie and I were both wondering what was going to be said next. It was great, but a little bit nerve-wracking. But that's kind of the reference I made at the beginning to that kind of culture of relationships within the, and respect within the Quality Circle, that actually it was able to land as we'd hoped, and people listened with open minds, prepared to hear the difficult stuff, and then we're really keen to act on the difficult stuff and make things different. I was very moved, I think, by the end of the session, at the passion in the room.
Yeah, and I think there was a lot of surprise and shock, really, because I suppose with Dad sharing his experiences, I suppose it was very no holds barred in terms of how passionate he was getting his views across, really. So the result of that, I think there was lots in the room, lots of people in the room who were, I suppose, sad that he had experienced the system in that way. So, although we have the culture of respect, it was thinking, well, actually, we need to do something else. What else can we do? So, there was a discussion and suggestions from our principal social worker, Tom Stibbs, as well as the great Martin Downs and Nicola and Laura, that we set up a anti-racist working group out of the Quality Circle representatives, which encompassed not just myself and Laura, but encompassed barristers, lawyers, one or two other representatives from different local authorities in that mix as well, to actually develop a family court anti-racist statement. Now, I was instrumental in developing that anti-racist statement along with Laura and other representatives from that anti-racist working group as part of the Quality Circle, which I think we're all really, really proud of. And I'll tell you why we're really proud of it. Because it's made such an impact. It was developed. We then were so proud of it. We presented it to the annual Sussex Family Justice Board annual conference, which was over 200 people in Brighton, just to present it and get people's thoughts and views. And we didn't just present it to the annual Justice Board conference. We put a copy of the anti-racist statement for the family court on every single person's seat in that space, because the space was full of lots of judges, some of whom are quite scary, and barristers and lawyers in that space. So we thought, okay, we want to really have it go far and wide. So we first presented it there to over 200 barristers, judges, lawyers, and then it was then taken to the local Sussex Family Justice Board for ratification. We wanted it ratified. So Martin Downs, the barrister, took it to the local Family Justice Board for ratification. And that ratification was quite important for us, because once ratified by the Family Justice Board, it meant that our anti-racist family court anti-racist document would be used in all the family courts down here in Sussex and in South East, which has been fantastic. And that's now been ratified for use in the family courts down here in Sussex and parts of the South East. And we've circulated it to all social workers within children's services, because there are also additional challenges, particularly with some of our young people and Black young people who are overrepresented within the court system. It's just to remind everybody that we now have this amazing family court anti-racist statement.
It was so brilliant recently, Millie, wasn't it, when we had a social worker that was worried about some of the thinking, the decision making in in a family's case that she had in court, and we were able to say, look, here's your mandate. Here is the statement for anti-racist practice we've developed locally. You can use this to say, no, hang on, I need this to be challenged. For me, that was a real yes moment.
Absolutely. And that's actually brilliant. And thank you for raising that, because the other benefit of that, when I originally and earlier touched on, there's a lot of fear social workers have. There's a lot of fear of challenging racism and discrimination. And everyone is still growing in confidence to do that. So in terms of thinking about, because it's hard sometimes to think about, okay, how you challenge members of the judiciary, lawyers or judges. So the other way we spoke about how that social worker could also challenge the judiciary was also through our legal representatives, our lawyers, our barristers that represent us and the children and families we're working with, the children in particular, within that court space. That's another way you could bring others with you, and by doing that as well, we are continuing to build allies, really, and focusing on allyship and solidarity, so that it's not always Black staff members either that are continually, or Black families for that matter, and young people who are continually challenging racism. And I suppose the other thing, before I finish, I will say that we also did, following the ratification of the Family Court Anti-Racist Practice Statement, was to bring it with Martin's and Nicola's assistance to the Nuffield board, who are also began to look at it with us, with the view to us thinking potentially as a quality circle ourselves, as well as with others' support, like the Nuffield. We're thinking about how we can develop with our multi-agency partners an actual anti-racist guide for the family court. I keep telling everybody, Laura knows, I want to change the world. I know I can't do that on my own, but that would be an amazing thing if we could develop a guide that could be used in all family courts. So this is just the beginning. And before I finish, I will suppose what the Family Court Anti-Racist Guide has also done. It's greatly assisted, really, in helping us develop training for magistrates. And more recently, I developed some anti-racist training for magistrates, supported by Laura, who worked in partnership with me in delivering that training. And that initially started off as quite scary, but was actually okay in the end, because they're
becoming
all
a theme, isn't it, Millie?
Yeah, they're all human beings once you get into that space. So I did a half-day workshop with Laura, and that was really powerful in terms of thinking about bias, prejudice, and everyone's learning in that space, I would say, and how we've built relationships and thinking and critical reflection from within children's services in Brighton and Hove, across to the quality circle, across to lawyers, barristers and academics and others, right now into work with the magistrates. And that's something I've been really pleased about, and that we're all really pleased about, and that I personally would like to do more of, because that's 30 barristers, not just from Brighton and Hove, but from Sussex, and we had some further afield in the southeast, actually, that we've now touched with anti-racist practice training, as well as imparting on them the Family Court Anti-Racist Statement for them to use within their court spaces. So I can't change the world overnight, but I'm going to slowly chip away.
The area.
Changing the area as a starting point, and we have made seriously good inroads into doing that. And I will also add that the interview with Dad E on Quality Circle was also, in terms of the learning from it as well, in particular, was also published in Quorum BAF, which Louise was instrumental in doing as well in her previous role. And I think I better stop there. But I hope that's been useful.
That's been fantastic. Thank you, Millie, and thank you, Laura. I'm going to ask Nicola just to reflect on Millie and Laura's contribution there.
Thank you both. You know, every time I hear you speak, I learn something, a different angle of stuff that actually I was quite heavily involved in, and it's just always really, really inspiring hearing you both speak, and your passion to change the world, Millie. You know, I've recorded it that you said you're going to be doing all this training for us, so you know I'm going to take you at your word. You provide such, you provide such a clear, concise account of such a complex, it's so complex, isn't it, and sensitive and ultimately important action that has actually had a direct influence on changing a culture in a system that is so traditionally difficult to change, you know. And and I know Millie has used this term before, this is a marathon, you know, we are at the beginning of that process, but you can already see it having traction. And in particular, the introduction of an anti-racist statement for courts gives a really clear statement to all that covert and overt discrimination will not be tolerated. And if we do see evidence of discrimination, as Laura referred to, we have a really clear document statement that we hold people to account. And the most senior judge in the court system, and we do cover Surrey as well, actually, is signed up to that. So we will take the matter to him if we are seeing that the principles are not being complied with, and I think that is just massively important. And again, I just want to reinforce, we're able to get Dad's voice heard through relationships, but in turn it put a lens on how in the past relationships with Dad has been compromised due to discrimination, and relationships can be discriminatory, and we need to be really mindful of that. And again, to stress that in order to get the positive outcomes for the family, patience, time, and you know, all the work that BASW has been doing around the 80-20 agenda in terms of what we can do to create time for practitioners is really, really important. Thank you both, and thank you for letting us speak and go on about Quality Circle.
No,
I know we've some questions.
We've got some questions. Yes, we've got quite a lot of questions, so we'll see how we do. One of the questions is around issues of confidentiality.
Yes.
So what are the challenges there, Nicola? Because obviously you're bringing people in who have children, who, you know, where families are involved in the court systems. How are you managing those tricky issues?
Yeah, it's really super sensitive, and we got advice, I think, before Daddy talked, and then we've now consolidated that advice about what the parameters are of what we can do. That has been, so we got legal advice, and we've also talked to God, what's his term? What's the term? DFJ, and so that he has signed off that, you know, obviously, if there's a situation where it's in current care proceedings, there's loads of sensitivities. If there are people that, or there will be people that we know that may be involved within that particular family, and if we know that they're going to be at the Quality Circle event, that needs to be flagged up with them, and permission sought, that's okay. We don't record the event because because of course that therefore leaves extra vulnerabilities around confidentiality, and we absolutely make sure, so obviously Daddy is not called Daddy, you know, so we make sure that people's names are kept confidential, and also in, you know, the really pragmatic things like what comes up on their Teams call. We have to be really careful about what device they use, how they're signed in, so that their name isn't coming up. But we have got actually a statement around confidentiality, which I didn't actually share that as a resource, but I am really happy to share that. Laura, you were a bit involved with this as well, weren't you, in terms of confidentiality? Is there anything you need to add?
No, I think you've described it pretty well, Nicola. As you said, we just had to be really careful. We did things like we referred to him as a dad from Africa, which is an enormous continent, but actually that helped with, you know, not pinpointing who he was in a small city like Brighton. For me, it's about working out how we can make this happen rather than using worries about confidentiality to stop us. And luckily, we have senior lawyers in Brighton that were able to share that view and help us make it okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think this question probably touches on this as well, which is around the support for you and the steering group. So how do the organisations that you're in support you to do this work?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm laughing, aren't I? Because everybody that is here knows this. We are so super busy that it sometimes, there's no two ways about it, it is difficult to prioritize, but because we are so passionate about it, for me personally, at the beginning of my involvement, my assistant director, my boss, was very protective and would be very annoyed at it being me being pulled into doing this work. But as it's got traction and has impact, and she can see that it's making a difference in terms of actually our social work experience in court is much more positive as a result of the culture of respect document, for example. So I know that in East Sussex, you know, and then my new boss is putting her shoulder behind it, and it's part of my work plan now. And I don't know if there's a similar experience in Brighton.
Absolutely. I mean, I came into my role and there was an expectation that perhaps I'd get involved with this, so I did. And for sure, some of it happens outside of my ordinary working hours, but it's very much valued, you know, as the impact it has on practice, and how it gets us to talk with other authorities and other areas of the family court system about good practice. So, yeah.
And I'm very passionate about work as well. So, you know, there is a lot of work we sometimes do outside of our working hours. But I suppose in terms of the other thing around support, I think I feel very supported, I suppose, within Brighton and Hove. And on top of that, you know, there's also some type of clinical supervision as well, which I think is important as a Black woman, Black member of staff doing this anti-racist work, which can be really exhausting and tiring and traumatizing. So, you know, I think that's also important, as well as a Black worker involved in this.
I think it's probably a good idea just to share an observation from a member of the audience, which was around how you are role models in terms of social work and social work leadership.
Shucks.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I knew you wouldn't be able to respond to that very well. That was awful, ladies.
Yes.
I'll butt in with that actually, because I think something that is important is that Millie and I work together and we role model a Black worker and a white worker working together to tackle anti-racist practice. I think we have a better reach that way. I think it's more authentic that way. I think it's right that I share the load with Millie, acknowledging what your lived experience means in terms of the real emotional, personal toll this work takes on you.
And there is an emotional toll, and it is tiring. And I think the other benefit of having Laura also undertake training with me, when I'm there talking about white privilege sometimes and white supremacy, Laura is brilliant in getting involved in terms of talking about her perspective and her understanding of white privilege as well, which is really brilliant to actually have in that space. So yeah.
Thank you. Okay, I think we've just got time for one more question, which is what next for QC? How can it be sustained?
The world.
And how can we share some of the learning more widely?
Yeah, I mean, I think the really important next step for us is turning the lens to the workforce and well-being, and that in effect also has an impact on well-being for the children and families whom we serve. And I think in particular the last event that we had, the Born into Care experience, where the mother talked so movingly about how she in effect was dismissed through the court process, and then that brought, actually Michelle Fay really beautifully articulated this, that nobody goes into the job to do that to a mother, so that is often the product of pressures, burnout, survival mechanism, because we do the most difficult things, don't we, removing children from parents' care, and the toil that has on everybody that is involved in that process, and we need to have more regard into the impact of that. So it brings in the trauma-informed stuff, it brings in vicarious trauma, the experience of our Black colleagues in courts who may be experiencing discrimination, the trauma that results in. So we already have a wellbeing statement in the court setting that wasn't generated through Quality Circle, but we need to be revisiting that, giving it a bit of meat on the bones, really, about what we're expecting and how we're supporting each other to look after each other's well-being and creating a reflective space that allows us to process some of this stuff. Really interestingly, though, when I was talking at the Quality Circle steering group about this the other day, all the lawyers shut up. You know, all the social workers were well engaged in the reflective space discussion, and all the lawyers were not a word from them, but we will get them there. In terms of rolling it out across the service, I think that across, wider, we have had, I've talked at the National Principal Social Work event with Martin, and because Martin is very keen, and I think this is a good idea, it needs to be seen as a shoulder-to-shoulder social work lawyer enterprise, because otherwise it's just led by, and so many initiatives are, that legal can be very dominant in this arena, and we need to have a good social work voice. So there are some great family justice boards who are doing something similar to us. For example, in I think understanding Northumberland and in Leicestershire, they're sort of similar things to us. So we need to join forces, really, and the anti-racist practice statement, I'll let Millie just maybe chip in at the end about that, is a good example of how this needs to be a national enterprise.
Absolutely agree. And that's what I mean when I say I want to change the world. I want the family court anti-racist statement to be used across the whole of the United Kingdom, really, and even further, potentially. And I suppose I'll just make one final point as well within the mix of that. What I didn't share at the very end of my discussion about Daddy was that the positive result of the work and the anti-racist work with the social workers and the multi-agency partners resulted in, well, should I say some of the work's continuing, but it's resulted in Dad now having full care of his daughter right now. And I think his final words, I suppose, to the Quality Circle as we were finishing was, it was awesome. That's the word he used, awesome, to have his daughter back in his care. And we are now moving towards discharging the full care order that we have for his daughter, and everything's going smoothly despite some challenges.
Millie, that's a fantastic note to end on, and I just want to thank Laura and Nicola and Millie for a great session, and I'm going to ask Maris to come in here and to give us some final reflections.
Thanks, Louise. What an absolutely brilliant session, honestly, to each of you. Millie, Nicola, Laura, absolutely brilliant. And I think just some of the points that I wanted to highlight again that I think are really important messages is, what you've shared with us is about how change can happen, influencing and making a difference, and the Quality Circle certainly shines a light on that, but also for you as individuals, the passion, the drive, and the importance of founding relationships and building and strengthening relationships as well. I think I'd also like to highlight the specific focus in terms of the importance of anti-racism and having those difficult conversations. If we are going to grow and really improve practice and leadership, it's about having those rub-up conversations, as Laura's described. It's exactly what Millie has said about challenging racism, challenging stereotypes, bias, and also looking at the way we work with different lens, from an intersectionality perspective, from a lens of actually being brave enough to be challenged and brave enough to challenge others. And that passion is so important in terms of future generations of social workers. And the focus today in terms of making sure that we make time for working with people, it's also about how we create the time as peers and how we challenge other organisations and individuals. So a real celebratory event, very moving, incredibly powerful. And I am committed to changing the world with you, Millie. So I think, you know, my final point is I think this is something that BASW can actively engage in. We can support, we can grow, we can send the message out, and we will support you in any way you can, any way we can. You are making a difference. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody. I think we're drawing to an end now, Maris. So this is
We
the
are.
last session.
There's just some final points for events in terms of later this week and also next week. So I just want to highlight a reminder of, we've got our climate change event, No One Left Behind, on the 10th of March. Please log on and join that event. You can book today. And we've also got a series of World Social Work Month events in the next 2 weeks. Another joint event with Social Work England on the 17th of March. All of that information is on the webpage. And once again, thanks to our inspirational leaders. You've been stars.